Good morning and welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Morning Show. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us this morning. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, thank you for that. If you're checking us out elsewhere, we do upload these shows to www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. We have audio and video versions there for you to check out. So please give us a listen. Getting into your traffic this morning, I-12 is flowing as of right now with only minor delays on those on-ramps getting up onto the interstate. 64 flowing as well with some minor delays if you take a left there on Greenville Springs, but only minor so far right now on Greenville Springs. School traffic, of course, going to be normal today. Kids are back in school full time. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about a lot of those kids who are returning for their first full week, especially at elementary schools, where they're going to be there for 5-day instruction. So grades pre-K through 5, this is the first week, I guess you can say, that they're going to be starting to get back together, all together, I guess you can say, every day. Again, the first technically full week is going to be the week after next, since Labor Day is Monday, but we're not going to get too complex with all that. But we do, the schools do have a request for you, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But of course, normal school traffic this morning. It's currently 74 degrees, 93 degrees is your high today, 74 your overnight low, just a 10% chance of rain. Weather's going to be a lot like it was yesterday. Of course, as I look out the window here, the sun is peeking out over the trees, so it's going to be a beautiful morning. Again, much like yesterday, just a 10% chance of rain. Of course, a chance for some scattered showers. It is Louisiana summer after all. Want to get into your mitigation efforts real quick for COVID-19. Please remember to wear a mask in public. It is a mandate. Wash your hands for 20 seconds or more. 6 feet or more of distance between yourself and others in public. Control cough and sneezing with an elbow or a tissue, preferably your own elbow. Don't touch your face, my favorite one. 25 or less to a gathering, preferably less, and stay home if you're sick, and utilize telehealth to get in touch with your doctor, and stay home to work if at all possible. Mr. David Gray, our lifestyle editor, caught up with Mr. David Comm, a 2015 graduate of Springfield, who now lives in Vinton, Louisiana. Now, home came to him, I guess you can say. Albany and Springfield residents showed up in Vinton as early as the weekend and have been doing things like bringing supplies, helping clean up, helping put tarps on roofs, and cooking for the local folks there. So Mr. Combs admitted that he may have cried a few times. Vinton was hit very hard by Hurricane Laura, and they needed the help. So home came to him and helped him out. You can read all about his interview with Mr. David Gray at www.livingstonparishnews.com/breaking news. A conservative think tank, the Pelican Institute, if you've heard of them, they are the Pelican Institute for Public Policy. Their offices are in New Orleans, has proposed that the governor must seek legislative approval to extend a disaster declaration. As we all know, with the phases going on and the way that this has been extended with regard to responding to COVID-19, especially that we're still in phase 2. This most recent extension of phase 2 has seemed to push people to the breaking point. They are very much worried about schools. They're worried about some people going back to work. There are some, especially circulating on Facebook, things like recall petitions and that sort of thing. So this most recent extension through September 11th, we'll probably learn next Tuesday what the governor plans to do in terms of moving to phase 3, but some good news in that regard with our COVID statistics that we're going to talk about in a minute. But disaster declarations normally last 30 days. Of course, COVID-19 is a little different than your normal disaster declaration. Of course, we have one going on right now for Hurricane Laura. And what the disaster declaration does is it opens up the federal and state partnership. So usually what happens is the governor declares a disaster and the president must approve it. Now, beyond that, mayors and parish presidents must make their own disaster declarations to be able to be part of that funnel. But what it does is it opens up, that way, if you have a disaster and some either local government or the state government is looking for disaster assistance, especially from FEMA, there's some kind of checks and balances there, especially from the president's office, to make sure people aren't just declaring a disaster, when they had maybe a flash flood and it's a local disaster that must be handled locally. So, of course, Hurricane Laura, definitely not a localized disaster. Of course, a major hurricane that's caused tons of damage and destruction on the southwest coast of Louisiana. Moving up into, we're finding out those winds stayed pretty steady, over 100 miles per hour, getting into central Louisiana as well. So a lot of damage through those parishes on the west side and central portion of Louisiana. So, that disaster declaration should last for 30 days, may be extended depending on how long it takes to clean things up. Of course, he will extend it if power is not returned to much of the greater portion of the Lake Charles area. Right now, they're predicting 3 weeks. We're at kind of the tail end here of week 1. So we will see. We do know that there are reports, especially from Allen Parish, where the Livingston Parish Sheriff's deputies are, that power is being restored. But returning to this proposal, the conservative think tank, Pelican Institute, does believe that that would be the governor, seek legislative approval to extend disaster declarations. Of course, the governor says he's just following what the White House task force has said. Of course, the task force for coronavirus has visited Louisiana pretty recently, actually, came to LSU to speak. That included Vice President Mike Pence and Dr. Deborah Birx, who has kind of been the lead and been the main contact for Governor John Bel Edwards. Birx said that she's been behind what the governor has done, as has President Donald Trump. So it's an interesting sort of disconnect there between what the White House believes, or what the White House thinks, what the governor is thinking, and then, of course, what the citizens of Louisiana are thinking. Of course, we'll get into the statistics in a little bit, but the Pelican Institute believes that the restrictions should be lifted for the sake of the economy, and the governor says he's just following White House guidance based on things that are going on in and around COVID-19, especially coming into the Laura disaster, because 2 storms were heading for the coast and they expected to have to evacuate people, that there would be flooding, that there would be disaster response. The governor was concerned about spikes. So we will see what the legislature picks up in that regard. We're also, there's a lot of legal questions that surround the emergency declaration and getting in, if they get rid of it or if they try to. There's currently a conservative effort in the legislature to end it. Not entirely sure what that would do to funding. The initial belief was that the funding would be lost, at least up until that point. So if anything happened beyond that point with regard to COVID-19, including another spike, there would be no federal help available. Of course, Louisiana suffering from economic woes, as the Pelican Institute does point out. A lot of that has to do with the fact that, if you remember, I know it seems like a lifetime ago, but at the beginning of the COVID-19 disaster, OPEC and Russia kind of got into it over oil, and Louisiana and Texas kind of caught the brunt of that. Both countries kind of or OPEC as a conglomerate of countries, and Russia kind of showed, who runs the world's oil supply, and in a very bad way. They were both able to absorb some revenue hits, while Louisiana took the brunt of it in terms of jobs and that sort of thing, and Texas as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to COVID-19, and especially the way it affects Louisiana. We've run a couple of stories in the past about how this is going to affect us differently because of that oil issue coming into the beginning of COVID-19. It's going to be slower for us to bounce back. And maybe that's why the Pelican Institute wants the restrictions to be removed. We shall see. But according to Representative Alan Seabaugh, who is a Republican from the Shreveport area, who has pushed removing the governor's emergency declaration for the COVID-19 disaster, the economy needs to get back rolling, and we can't deal with another extension. Right now, the statistics are looking good to move into phase 3, and again, we'll talk about that in just a second. Actually, it's the next thing we'll talk about. But it is important to note that there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of legal questions about what the governor's done, and there's a lot of legal questions about what would happen if we remove the emergency declaration. Very tenuous situation. Getting into your COVID-19 statistics, 149,838 cases, 4,841 deaths statewide, 1,903,883 total tests. 134,432 have recovered. That's a great sign. 873 are hospitalized on 132 ventilators. In Livingston Parish, 3,429 cases, 66 deaths on 34,293 tests. Now, a lot of that is great numbers. Those cases are starting to grow slower, especially statewide. Hospitalizations have plummeted since the most recent discussion, especially back near the end of July, when the governor brought several local directors from hospitals to speak on the fact that, you know, they were running out of room. And in some cases, especially in the Lafayette area, patients were having to be transferred to other regions, which was, of course, the fear, because that means that other regions would start to fill up more quick. What that does is it causes a lot of people not to receive the care that they needed. As you can see now, those hospitalizations are dropping rapidly statewide, as is the ventilator use. It's not dropping as fast, I'm sure, as the state would like, but that is dropping. The number of new cases, of course, have dipped below 1,000 and have stayed there per day, 1,000 per day, I should say, for several weeks. So as long as we do not have a spike from Laura and disaster response, we are looking at a pretty good scenario to move into phase 3. That, of course, will be announced either Monday or Tuesday. He's kind of gotten into a Tuesday announcement for changing phases as of late. So we're expecting it next Tuesday coming up. Schools, we discussed earlier that this week they're going to start welcoming back 3rd graders, 4th graders, and 5th graders for 5-day instruction. Of course, next week they won't. They'll just have 4 because of Labor Day. But from that point forward, there will be all elementary students will be coming for 5-day instruction. One of the things that the school system is asking is if you're a parent that can bring your child to school, please do. Bus restrictions make it very difficult, especially in phase 2. It's only 50%. If you can bring your child to school, please do. That's very helpful for the school. It's very helpful for the transportation department. And they're going to try to see how that goes, especially when they're considering moving up and putting 6, 7, and 8 for 5 days a week. Because you have to remember, at elementary schools, there's a certain amount of buses per school, but there are fewer children per elementary school. As you move up the ladder, especially into junior high, a lot of that gets consolidated into individual schools where you have many more children. You need many more buses, especially if you have a bus limit. So please, if you have an elementary child, please, and you're going back to that 5-day instruction, or if you have a child at any level of instruction, please try to bring them to school if at all possible. That's a school board request. The governor and the Secretary of State, Kyle Ardwin, and the legislature continue this kind of 3-way love triangle over the way the fall elections are going to work. The Secretary of State, Kyle Ardwin, said that he brought a plan to a Republican-dominated legislature in both the Senate and the House that he believed they would pass. This has fewer days for early voting, which, of course, was expanded for these spring elections that were held over the summer. It would also restrict absentee ballots or mail-in ballots, which are the statement out there is that they're subject to fraud. However, that claim was kind of debunked. But the other issue that was considered was that the United States Postal Service would have trouble handling the new load with people voting absentee. Now, a couple of things about that. The Baton Rouge regional office did inform Kyle Ardwin that they had some troubles logistically handling those votes. They did say they would have it fixed for the fall election. Secretary of State Kyle Ardwin was not convinced. Also, with regard to those absentee ballots, it was expanded, but only about 19% of eligible people submitted their ballot absentee over the spring, and they were mostly people that would have been eligible anyway. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what happens with this fall election. Now, one of the arguments against what Mr. Ardwin is saying is that normally these presidential elections, especially the one coming up November 3rd, are much more well-traveled. Going to be a lot higher traffic. Going to be a lot higher traffic. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly where they land. The governor had said throughout the process, as he was going through legislative committees, that he was going to veto whatever it was they passed unless they passed it with a veto-proof majority. Instead, it's ended up in court. And yesterday, the governor filed a memorandum asking the court to direct the Secretary of State to implement a plan that more resembled what occurred over the summer, which is expanded early voting to 2 weeks as opposed to one, and expanded absentee voting, which would include people who can medically prove that they are at high risk of going to a public polling place to vote. So it's going to be interesting to see what the courts do with that over the time. But a Republican from Central by the name of Barry Ivey did say during the House committee meeting on this issue, if we don't find a better way, better compromise with the governor, this is going to end up in court. Looks like he was pretty prophetic because it did. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as it moves through court. Going to see what those judges do in the 19th Judicial District. Excuse me. Also want to bring up, there is a group of parents, including one parent and her son from Denham Springs, who are pushing for football to start. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in an education committee meeting tomorrow. Mr. Rob DeArmond is going to be writing up a story about that today, our sports editor. But there is an education meeting, committee meeting. There's going to be quite a few people testifying about what's going on with school and what's going on with sports. So keep an eye on that. If you want to watch it, we will post the link tomorrow. It should be live, as it is a live committee meeting, especially with COVID-19 restrictions. So they're going to be talking about that. Of course, LHSAA kind of having their own timeline, but they are looking to the state for guidance on certain things. There's also something called Act 9, which is baked into that. Mr. Rob DeArmond can explain it better than I can, but what it does is it's trying to protect the LHSAA from being sued, especially if a child gets sick. Of course, we are in a lawsuit-happy state. So, a lot of protections trying to go on here. One last time with your COVID-19 statistics, 149,838 cases, 4,841 deaths, 1,903,883 tests. 134,432 have recovered. 873 are hospitalized on 132 ventilators. In Livingston Parish, 3,429 cases, 66 deaths on 34,293 tests. Remember your mitigation efforts. Wear a mask in public. It is a mandate. Wash your hands for 20 seconds or more with soap and water. 6 feet or more of distance between yourself and others. Control your cough and sneezing with an elbow or a tissue, preferably your own elbow. Don't touch your face, my favorite one. 25 or less to a gathering, and stay home if you are sick. And utilize telehealth to get in touch with your doctor, and stay home to work if at all possible. Looking at it this morning, I-12 is flowing for the time being with only some minor on-ramp delays. 64 heading into Central flowing well, although some minor delays on Greenville Springs Road. School traffic, of course, getting back to normal this week after we had some interesting bumps in the road last week with Laura. And again, yesterday, 3rd grade went back for 5 days a week. Today, 4th grade, tomorrow, 5th grade. And of course, next week, going to have to start dealing with full traffic for elementary schools. It's currently 75 degrees, 93 degrees is your high today, 74 your overnight low. Sun peeking out over the trees this morning. Looking like it's going to be a beautiful day, much like yesterday's weather, with just a 10% chance of rain. One last time, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us this morning for the Livingston Parish News Morning Show. Want to remind you guys that we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We are once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. We have a podcast page, which is free, a coronavirus page, which is free, and a breaking news page, which has state, national, and arrest news and accident news for you to check out at your leisure. Want to remind folks you can watch the show at any time on our Facebook page. Just check it out there. We also put it online, as mentioned, at www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. Free to watch there as well. Hope you have a great day. Please try to stay safe out there on the roads, and we will see you tomorrow morning.